All right, good morning. Thank you for coming out. Hopefully you're stuffed from all the bacon and sausage at breakfast and ready to hone in and focus on and talk about some charitable giving. As Alexander said, my name is Peter Lipsett, Lawson Bader. We're with Donors Trust. Donors Trust is a community foundation and donor-advised fund focused on simplifying giving and making it a little more effective for, frankly, folks like you, folks who care about limited government, personal responsibility, free enterprise, and the other principles that get us excited and get us going and that we're talking about here at this conference. And what we want to talk about today is philanthropy and charitable giving. We think charitable giving is really important, and part of that's because that's our day job, right? But we also think it really has the ability to move the needle and to change culture. And certainly many of you, I'm sure, are giving politically, giving to different political causes. All that's very important too. We've also all seen the political leaders who maybe shift from where we would like them to be over time. And that is why we think giving to charitable causes, particularly public policy organizations like Civitas, John Locke, others that are here and in the national level, helps to focus the ideas of some of those politicians and also keep our ideas moving over the long term through the political cycles so that the core bedrock principles that we really care about don't drift away and are always at the forefront. And frankly, more than charity, more than charitable giving, what we want to talk about here is philanthropy. We tend to associate philanthropy with your Carnegies and your Gilded Age philanthropists who give lots away and have billions of dollars to give. But we want to make the argument that philanthropy really is just charity on steroids. It's charity that has some thought behind it, that is really, a philanthropist is somebody who has taken the time to think strategically about their giving, to go from just giving money out to saying, this is what I want to achieve, this is what I want to accomplish. And that is how, frankly, as the title says, we counter to the left and we push back. It's by having focus, having direction, knowing what we want to achieve, and actually putting the power behind it in small amounts or large amounts to get there. So being a philanthropist is how you can create real change. And you do that by changing the culture. This is a great quote by Daniel Patrick Moynihan. It says, "The central conservative truth is that it is culture, not politics, that determines the success of a society. And the central liberal truth is that politics can change a culture." And what he's saying there is that the left, our good friends on the left, like to use politics as a buggy whip to move their ideas forward, that the politicians get in, legislate change, legislate culture, and drive change that way. But we see it differently. We see it that we can actually change hearts and minds on a personal level within the culture, and the politicians, once they see that that change is happening, will actually rush to the front of the line to lead that parade. And they will say, oh, okay, yeah, we should do this because the culture is changing. And so through our philanthropic dollars, we can do this. Another way to say this is that politics is downstream of culture. You may have heard that before. This idea that culture is really the well that drives the political change. And our philanthropic dollars, through what, like I said, Civitas and other groups are doing, is driving that change. So today we're going to look at philanthropy. We're actually going to flip it around a little bit and start with the mistakes that people make that we have seen as we've gone through all of this, and maybe some of you have seen some of these mistakes as well, and use that as a catalyst to talk about what are the things we could be doing, what are the principles that we should be doing. Now I'm sure we have all range of charitable giver in here, from people who don't really do it or maybe give a little bit to the Salvation Army when they have their big red bins out at Christmas time, to people who actually already are thinking very strategically about this, have foundations, have donor-advised funds, give in a very targeted way. And I'm sure the whole scope is represented here. So hopefully going through some of this may say, oh yeah, I made that mistake, but I moved on from that. And hopefully there'll be a few things you can take away. So let's jump right into mistake number one, which is to always say yes. I mean, look at her. Saying yes, she's so happy, hooray, yes. We all love to say yes. Saying yes is lots of fun, as this woman shows. But saying yes is also a really good way to spread ourselves thin. If we say yes to every Boy Scout jamboree and direct mail letter and friends, uncles, cousins person who asks us for money, then we're just not driving anything forward. We're giving too little to too many causes, and real change is just not going to happen that way. Frankly, the inverse is true as well. If we say no to every cause that comes along, because we're gonna really hone in and we're gonna focus, but you never actually experiment with anything, never actually put your dollars where your ideas are, well, that's really just as bad. What we need to do instead is really hone in on what we care about. So instead of saying yes to every cause, which are the causes that really get you excited? When you open the newspaper and you see an article about the troubles at the VA or a homelessness issue in your town or some other public policy fight, is there one of those that really makes you perk up and say, oh, I want to affect change in this area. This is something I really care about. This gets me really riled up. That may be an area where you may want to focus some of your charitable giving to actually drive the change. Because as Lawson will talk about in a minute, the causes are out there, the groups are out there to help make that change and really drive it forward. So ask yourself, what do you really care about? I just read this great book called Give Smart by Tom Tierney, who's a businessman, and Joel Fleischman, who used to run Atlantic Charities, so big philanthropic guy. And they have this great quote in there, many great quotes, but it said, setting out to do good isn't enough. You will accomplish far more if you set out to accomplish something specific. So be specific in your giving. So don't just always say yes to any opportunity that comes along. Instead, set strategic goals for your charitable giving. Know the North Star of what you really want to see happen. What are the outcomes that you want to have happen? So if you really care about education reform, that's going in the right direction. But then do you really care about more charter schools or higher education, or what aspect of it really gets you excited? And then find the organizations that'll help move that forward. And to kind of jump into that, turn it over to Lawson to move into mistake number 2.
There are somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million charities in the United States. And just like the stars, they are all not created equally. Some of those have frankly decayed, but the light is still lingering and sending forth a certain glow. Others have just been born, and that the pulsing is still sort of happening, but we haven't noticed it. Others are very effective at grabbing others using their metaphorical gravitational force to pull others together, create alliances, create constellations, and therefore improve their effectiveness. And of course, some are just black holes, sucking the life and the money out of everything that comes by in the same orbit. Well, these all apply to charities just as well. Not all charities are created equal. And I know it seems simple, but we oftentimes don't think of it that way. A lot of them, what they seek can be different. What their tactics are can be completely different. And it's important that you understand how those align with your particular interests and your particular mission, the tactics that you think are most effective. Some are focused really on just preserving and advocating ideas. Others are focused on relief, housing, medical supplies, food. Some, of course, have a very overt religious purpose. It can be interfaith dialogue. It can be conversion, theological education. It really ranges. And of course, some are very specific to, as Peter mentioned, policy interests, education reform, or even arts reform, whatever it might be. But how they go about doing that is so important. Some are sort of the idea generators. Others are, okay, how do you put this into practice? Civitas would fall, I think, into that category as a nonprofit charity. Some are just preserving artifacts and homes and buildings and museums and monuments. Whether they come or go is a different question, but that's what they're about. And then others, of course, are directly providing aid services to individuals or institutions. Not all organizations are funded the same, and this is something that oftentimes we see in our world that people don't think about. There are a lot of charities out there that actually get most of their support from government sources. Now, we can have a conversation. I wouldn't really categorize that as a charity in the true sense of the word, but in a way, if you're contributing to them, you're really doing nothing more than just contributing to another government program in the way they see it. And there are others that will only accept private funds, or will only accept funds from certain kinds of sources, only foundations, only individuals, only corporations, no corporations. The case may be very, very broad. And then also, not all organizations are managed the same. Running a C3, a 501c3 as the legal status is called, is very different from running a corporate structure. And some are very effective, and others, frankly, in the universe of nonprofits, are more about a cult of personality. And you have to ask the question, when that personality leaves the organization, does the organization even succeed and continue to succeed? And so you have to look at leadership. You have to look at boards. Are boards engaged? Are they actually supporting the organization that they're a part of? Or is it just sort of a fluff that they do because a friend asked them to? And then, as Peter hinted at, not all groups measure outcomes. I was involved once with talking to a guy who ran a literacy program, an inner city program. And I said, so how many kids, can read? And he looked at me. I said, well, compared to, say, last year. And he said, I don't have any idea. I said, well, that's, you may not know that number, and that's okay. But then he said, I'm not sure it really matters, because we're just trying to improve literacy. And I'm like, yeah, it actually does matter. If they can't read and you don't know if you're actually effective, then why are you actually doing this in the first place? Just on a side note, there are 27 literacy programs in the United States government, just for the record, including the Department of Agriculture. Not sure why, but maybe you have to learn how to read a corn husk. I'm not sure, but anyway. So again, the concern was less being able to have the data than it was understanding, as the leader of that particular charity, you do have an obligation to try to at least measure what your success can be. So being strategic, to sort of move back to the slide, not all things are created equal. Being strategic means knowing the outcomes that you are hoping to achieve, and then aligning those with those organizations that share those same principles. It also means trusting the people in charge to do what they are supposed to be doing, to remain committed to their mission, and to seek the tactical opportunities that nonprofit effectively can do when opportunities come along. So that is one way of shifting their focus. Peter?
And going along with both of those 2 points, we've got some material in the back, a new book that we have called Investing in Liberty, that kind of walks through, okay, I want to be more strategic, I want to focus this a little bit more, how do I do it? And we give you kind of a 9-step guide to thinking about it and approaching it in a couple different ways. And so grab that on your way out. Hopefully it'll be helpful to you. All right, so jumping to mistake number 3, just write a check. It's easiest. Now, this point is not to belittle check writing. Check writing's great. Giving cash is great. Giving online through a credit card is great. If that's the only way you're going to give to charity, fine, go forth. My point, though, is this, that just because you are being selfless in terms of giving to charity doesn't mean you have to ignore your own self-interest. And there are both vehicles and other means of giving that actually may be helpful to you as well as helpful to the charity, and therefore allow you to reach some of those outcomes in a more strategic and better way. And so what I want to do briefly is go through what some of those vehicles might be, and why you would do it. I mean, one of the reasons is maybe you're like me and get stuck on December 31st when you should be celebrating New Year's with your family, and you suddenly remember you didn't actually make all those charitable donations that you were supposed to make before the clock strikes midnight and the tax year changes, and you run off to the computer, and instead of having fun, you're re-entering your Amex card on 10 different websites. Maybe none of you have done that. Maybe it's just me. But it's a little silly, and then your Amex gets blocked because they think it's fraud. It's terrible. So, but there's better ways to do it. You don't just have to give cash. You don't just have to give with your check. And actually what I do now is use a donor advised fund, which is one of the things that Donors Trust offers. Donors Advised Fund is a great resource, particularly for people who don't have boo-hoodles of money, but want a vehicle that allows them to be a little more strategic. And so you can write one check, get your charitable deduction, put that money away, and kind of have it set aside, similar to a private foundation, which is another great tool. Have that money kind of set aside and ready when a charitable opportunity comes up. So that's what I've started doing to avoid that December 31st rush. Put the money away sometime in December, and then in January send a list off, and the Donor Advised Fund sends off all the checks. It's really great. It's convenient. It's a little more private. It's a nice way to have an extra layer between you and the organization. You do lose a little bit of control, and you have to pick your Donor Advised Fund carefully, because they may or may not actually agree with the things you care about. That's why we were formed, because we care about the ideas you care about, but some focus on different things. There's also a private foundation. If you've got, say, several $1 million that you want to give to charity, starting a private foundation is a great resource. It gives you more control. You can bring your family involved. You can do a lot of neat things with a private foundation. There's also some tax requirements, so all of these different vehicles have different trade-offs. And then you have your estate planning tools and your other vehicles, like your charitable remainder trust and charitable lead trust. I am no tax attorney. I am not going to get into the details of those. But know that there are a lot of different vehicles for supporting the charities you care about in a way that actually could be helpful to your broader planning as well, and allow you to actually give more over time, because you're just not pulling out of your cash flow, you're actually pulling out of the strategic resource, a strategic pot of money. Also, instead of just giving cash all the time, you may have other little pools of financial resources available that you don't even realize you could use for charity. And one of the big ones there is appreciated stock. So maybe Great Aunt Thelma, when you were young, gave you GE stock, and it's appreciated over time. And now if you sell it, you're going to have a pretty significant capital gains hit. But you can take that entire appreciated asset, donate to a charity, put it in a foundation, put it in a donor advised fund, and write off the capital gain. That goes away, and you get to take the charitable deduction at the level of where the stock is then, which is a great way to avoid that capital gain for resources, for cash alternatives that you don't necessarily need as cash, and then be able to support the charities you really care about. So you can do the same thing with property. If you inherit a property or have a lake house that you don't want anymore, or whatever it is, you can donate that property to charity or to a donor advised fund or to a foundation, still get the tax deduction, and it's just a neat way to do it. So all of that is to say, writing a check is great if that's what you're going to do. If that's the only way you're going to give to charity, please go forward. But if you have some of these other resources, or if you're ready to take that level to be a little more strategic and long-term thinking with some of your charitable plans, you want to use a vehicle and give in a way that really aligns with the things that you want to do, with the goals that you've set out. Lawson?
So this is my bah humbug moment. Is a growing problem we have in the United States that we are witnessing increasing pressure, largely from government politicians, but also other affiliated groups that sort of are forcing charities to disclose their donors, but at least to disclose it if they want to conduct business in their respective states. And I'm going to talk more about this at lunch, so I'm sort of going to punt on all the details, but just trust me, it is a very serious issue at the moment. And so maybe you think, I just give to a religious relief charity or a medical clinic for low-income folks, or I give to a group that's just providing tutoring to children at risk. So, I'm not sure I really care that much, and transparency is sort of a good thing anyway, isn't it? Well, that's true, unless that religious charity is run by a denomination that opposes same-sex marriage. Or that medical clinic is managed by Planned Parenthood, or the group that's doing the tutoring has a board of directors who are very publicly opposed or trying to fight some of the issues of teachers' unions, right? We know that this can bring up the ire of conservatives and progressives alike, and they will act accordingly. And in case you haven't noticed, we don't have a great deal of civility in our political culture at the moment. And so we're seeing this sort of lack of public trust, or in a very antagonistic way to go after the donors of organizations where there are politically unpopular causes at stake, or that are linked with politically unpopular causes. And of course that includes certain foundations in North Carolina. It includes my own organization. We are the dark money ATM of the right. So just in case you didn't know, you remember the IRS scandals during the Obama administration? The list goes on and on. Again, I'll mention a few at lunch. So you actually have to ask yourself, in this entire charitable world that you are in, how much do you care about your information being sort of kept private? And if you do care, how important is it to you that the organizations that you support share a same philosophical approach and, of course, protect the data? You may want to give so-and-so anonymously, and that's your right to do so. If you do, you have to recognize that what's the motivation behind it? For a lot of people, it's not some nefarious conspiracy. There are religious reasons why many people feel passionately about giving anonymously. There are people who run businesses that do not want their employees to sort of suffer negative public effects of your particular private views and choices. Some just want to be off a mailing list, right? And to avoid those pesky robocalls of I'm a paid solicitor with so-and-so, so-and-so. There's lots of perfectly legitimate reasons why giving quote-unquote anonymously is what you want to do. And so you need to understand what you want to do before you engage in that world, and what level of privacy matters to you. I actually meant to bring this up, but just because it's a conservative organization doesn't mean they don't list who's supporting something. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing wrong with that. Organizations can, if they're transparent about it, and you know that going in, that's fine. But if you also notice on this list from last night's dinner, there are 1 or 2 anonymous things in here. That's perfectly fine. But you may be surprised. Don't make an assumption because an organization is a certain way that it's going to either protect data or not. You have to ask yourself, what organizations sell mailing lists? It happens all the time. I've run several nonprofit organizations. No, we don't do that, so you're good. But you exchange mailing lists. You have to understand that with certain organizations, if they don't have a very effective mechanism protecting their data, there are nefarious attempts to take that data. You have to ask these questions of the charity going in, because you'd be surprised how many organizations, good organizations, don't actually have a system that's able to back up what they are doing and protect it from the outside, or they don't think it's a big deal. So again, recognize that you have a right to privacy with your philanthropy. That is your right. Know what level of privacy you are seeking. Respect the rights of others to have achieved the same privacy as well. And then be sure the groups that you actually are involved with care about and protect your privacy as well. So.
All right, so our 5th and final mistake that we're going to go through is that you can just trust future generations to handle all of the things that you care about, and they'll just keep it going forever, just like you like, at least until the money runs out. So we've talked about how to think about what are the right causes to give to, and how do you pick them, and how should you give to them. We've heard one of the concerns of kind of the here and now. This is the concern of the long term. This is the concern of after we can no longer steward our own charitable giving, whether it's just a small amount right as a bequest after we die, or whether it's several hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars after that future generations will keep going for many years. We need to think about this. I like this picture because this little girl looks a lot like my 3-year-old with all of the same disdain for authority and craziness that one gets with a 3-year-old. And I don't know what my 3-year-old's going to be like when she's 25, 55, 95. And same with my 5-year-old. And I see little glimmers. You've probably seen this in your own children. Maybe you have grown children and you actually know what they're turning into. And I trust all of you are very good parents, but sometimes the kids don't get it. And sometimes they drift away. And that's fine, that's life. But our charitable giving is our charitable giving. And so we should be in a position and prepared to put in constraints and parameters, and at least just write out and be clear about what we care about in our giving and really make it known. And so we talk a lot about a donor's trust, about donor intent. Donor intent being exactly what it sounds like, the intentions of the donor on what they want to have happen with their giving. Goes back to the very first point we made. Once you figured out strategically what you want to do, everybody else should know what it is you want to do, at least the people who are going to be stewarding that giving, or if that proverbial bus comes along, we'll make sure that your intentions are carried out over time. It is a big deal, and it's become cliche to talk about the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation, Pew Charitable Trust, and how they've drifted over time. There were 5 original trusts that made up Pew, the Pew Charitable Trust, and one of them was specifically meant to advance free enterprise and free market ideas. And it doesn't do that anymore. But, Pew is long since dead. Many generations have come and gone, and the ideas have just kind of fallen to the wayside, maybe by benign neglect, maybe by nefarious purposes. But whether it's benign or intentional, we want to try to avoid that. And it's still happening today. We see it. Our clients talk to us about concerns they have for the next generation, or maybe they've had it happen within their family, and they want to make sure it's protected. So instead of just hoping for the best, what we advocate is really writing down your donor intent, being clear on it. And anybody who's going to be involved in stewarding that, again, whether it's just a few hundred, a few $1,000s as a bequest after you die, or whether it's something longer term, making sure that the people who are going to have to carry that out know exactly what you want and put the parameters in place. You can do this through a foundation or a donor advised fund as well, create additional strictures around how that giving happens and bring in a third party to make sure that the donor intent is kept. And you see also on here, set a date for when your wealth will be spent down. This is something we call sunsetting. You see this a lot with conservative foundations, more so than on liberal foundations, although it happens there too. But thinking through, if you are fortunate enough to have the resources that can last for many years after you pass away, do you really want that to go on forever when that third generation, fourth generation, sixth generation that never knew you, never really understood the things you cared about is suddenly stewarding those dollars? Do you want them to try to guess at your intent? We say set a sunset date where it has to all be given away, gets money into the movement, helps us move our ideas forward, but it also protects your donor intent, and that's really important. And if this is an issue that's important to you, we also, in addition to the other resource I mentioned, we have something called the 8 Steps to Securing Your Donor Intent, also in the back, that kind of walks through how do you think about this? How do you get started in kind of writing down your intent and what you really care about and go about really protecting it? Because it is a big deal. It matters a lot. So with that, I will turn it back over to Lawson to kind of
Let's just review
wrap things up.
Review the 5 steps. I'm married to a school teacher, so I have to review things all the time when dinner happens. So set your strategic goals. What do you want to achieve? Why do you want to achieve it? Are you interested in a short-term project or long-term cultural change? Why do you even want to be participating in philanthropy? These are questions you need to ask. Secondly, be a principled giver, guided by core values. What do you believe? What principles do you want to see undergirding civil society? What support organizations that you may be involved in see the world differently, even though you've never asked that question? Do they receive a lot of money from government, for example? What draws you to certain organizations, and are they actually focused on trying to measure their success? Thirdly, use a charitable vehicle that matches your philanthropic strategy. As Peter said, there are a lot of different ways to give money. If you want to ruin your Christmas on December 31st and New Year's, you are perfectly free to do so. But there are donor advised funds. There's bequest accounts. The idea of you may not be able to give now, but you certainly may be able to give upon your death. And that's something to think about in a long-term strategy, of course. Develop what we call the mentality of a philanthropist, right? It's about a worldview. It's not about a dollar amount. And if you don't decide how you are going to do this, trust me, the government's going to decide for you. And in their various estate planning post-death, they're going to take a little bit of a fee to do that as well. And I don't think we actually want that. Fourth, as I mentioned, think about privacy and respect other people's privacy. How important is the data to you? How important is private giving to you? Ensure your information is being protected by the organizations you support. There are a lot of organizations right now on a policy front trying to fight back against some of these proposed changes. That may be a short-term giving opportunity for you in the moment, because this is actually a pretty important issue. And then lastly, as Peter just sort of talked about, define your donor intent and consider sunset your giving. What is your legacy going to be? How are you going to ensure that that is actually preserved? Have you included your families in these conversations? It's okay if they're 9 or 10 years old. They can still begin to understand that $1, when kids are in churches and giving and tithing, there's always a conversation of why they were doing that. We'll have the exact same conversation about your giving. We experience all the time the second, third generations who use us and have their parents have an account, and they want to do something that is actually explicitly against what their parents' desire was. And so the answer is no. It's really important to think about that as the intent standpoint. And I guess I said, be specific and reevaluate it on a regular basis. And do not let your giving last in perpetuity. Because when that happens, we see institutions, we see organizations shift what they are doing for nefarious and non-nefarious purposes. And the next thing that you know, or the next thing your second generation may know, is that dad and mom's and grandma's money is no longer supporting the causes that they know that you would have wanted. So, and then lastly, as we sort of think of the big picture, and bringing a bit back to sort of the conservative and sort of libertarian ideologies that we care about. We want you to do more than just give to animal shelters and churches and soup kitchens, which are all perfectly valid and perfectly good, worthy causes. But we want you to do your giving more than just feeling better or feeling obligated to in some capacity. We want to see change occurring, the kind of a change that matters to us. And that means we have to give broadly. Because change comes from a wide range of societal forces. That's what makes civil society robust, are all the various private actors joining together in an uncoordinated effort to actually bring about social progress. So that means investing in what we call the idea makers. This is Civitas and John Locke and others, the organizations that are really working to improve the conditions that are necessary for a free society. It means investing in the storytellers, right? Those who are fostering or creating new narratives of freedom and liberty, but they do this through the historians, the authors, the critics, the filmmakers, the anthropologists. There's different ways of approaching that. Invest in the disruptors, right? Those who have wonderful static or challenging static business models or using new technologies to empower citizens and consumers alike. Invest in the community builders. In North Carolina, that would be the Libre Initiative or the Better Yes Network, right? Those who are sort of fostering the idea of home or the importance of the local and the community, where that specific local knowledge is where we govern best. And that means you look at the local private symphony, planting trees along Main Street, sponsoring the Little League game, finding space for that nearby the local theater. This is all part of building community, which is so important to a civil society. Invest in the social entrepreneurs, right? Those who see transformation as more than just providing food and shelter, but who actually are trying to restore dignity, meaning, even a spiritual element, if you will, and create the opportunity for many people to flourish. When we do this, we strengthen the ability of these private institutions to do what they do best. And when we can develop very specific targeted giving habits that are linked with what we see as the values of liberty, then I do believe we make great strides to bring about a society that is much more free, much more prosperous, and far more peaceful than it is today.